All right. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you all. I pray everyone is doing great. I want to welcome everyone to our weekly Islam 101 class. I'm your brother Jamal Zaheen here at IIOC Outreach Department. We're very honored. We have our dear Shaykh and someone very important to our community and to our program as Sheikh Jameel Besada. Sheikh Jameel is the Imam, the religious director there at the Islamic Society of Corona Norco. In the Corona area, of course. He is also an instructor at IOK, which is the Institute of Knowledge in Diamond Bar, California. And a very busy man, mashallah, and someone who's been working with us very closely in our Dawah department, specifically with our new Muslim group. So I thank him for taking time out and joining us here today. For some of you, I know this might be your first time joining us. So Sheikh Jameel is going to talk about a topic, and the topic for today is going to be the Islamic New Year, specifically the month of Muharram, which is the name of the first month in the Islamic New Year, and then specifically maybe Ashura and some other dates there as well. Sheikh Jameel will expand and elaborate more on that. We will take questions at the end per the conversation. So if you have any questions regarding the discussion today, I would request you to go ahead and input those in the chat box. I will then get those over to Sheikh Jameel. And Sheikh Jameel will do his best, of course, to answer those questions, inshallah, God willing. And yeah, so without further ado, Sheikh Jameel, the floor is all yours.
All right. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wassalawatu wassalamu ala ashraf al-anbiya wal-mursaleen ala sayyidina wa habibina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa man tabi'ahum bi ihsanan ila yawm ad-din. Ma ba'd. As always, we begin in the name of Allah, asking him and beseeching him to send his mercy upon us, to forgive us, to guide us, to protect us, to protect our families, to accept from us our good deeds, to forgive us of our sins, and to send his peace and blessings upon his last and final messenger, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So before we begin, I don't know, obviously, the level of everybody in the room. Perhaps some of you are only, a couple weeks or months into Islam. Some of you are probably 10, 20 years in Islam. So just to kind of recap a little bit is we have a concept, I guess, in modern times, the concept of a calendar, right? Our calendar, the calendar that we know today, was a calendar that we referred to it as the Gregorian calendar, right? A calendar that consists of 12 months, and most months have either 30 days or 31 days, obviously with the exception of February, who every 4 years has a leap day. This concept of this calendar was actually created by Pope Gregory back in the 1500s or so, hence why it's called the Gregorian calendar. But the concept of, a calendar and having months and days and weeks, goes back, very early to the Greeks and the Romans, who were using calendars to, predict the harvest and to keep track of, when the rains would be coming and when, it would be a good time to plant and a good time to sow and a good time to reap, et cetera, et cetera. And so the world where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was born and raised in was not very different in that regard, where the pre-Islamic Arabs had a concept of a calendar as well. But there is one stark difference in their calendar versus our calendar. Well, I should say the pre-Islamic Arabs and then our calendar when I'm saying, the modern calendar. The modern calendar, as you know, is based off of a solar calendar, right? Marks our trip around the sun. The pre-Islamic calendar and the calendar that both the Jews and the Muslims use, which we'll get into in a second, is based off of the lunar calendar. Okay, now the lunar calendar goes off of the birth of the moon as opposed to our trip around the sun. And so in the solar calendar, right, June 1st is always June 1st, right? It doesn't change. It'll always be the same exact day with a variation of maybe like 8 hours or so from year to year. But by and large, it's the same. Wherever we are June 1st, in Earth will always be in that same position relative to the sun every single day on June 1st, right? Or every single year on June 1st. Whereas with the Islamic months, because they follow a lunar calendar, the calendar doesn't always match up with the solar calendar, right? So as you'll notice, the month of Ramadan will move backwards, I guess, relative to the solar calendar, about 10 or 11 days every single year. And so you'll notice that the Islamic year is shorter than the solar year or the Gregorian calendar. The lunar year is shorter by about, as I said, 10 days or so than the Gregorian calendar. Having said that, the months, therefore, that exist in the lunar calendar begin with the visible sighting of the crescent at the beginning of the month. And just like the Gregorian calendar, the lunar calendar also has 12 months. And those 12 months have different names than the names that we have, like January and February. The Islamic calendar has 12 months as well with different names. And the first month of the year is going to be our topic of today, the month of Muharram, the month of Muharram. And I'll talk a little bit about why Muharram is special, and I'll talk a little bit about why the 10th of Muharram specifically is made special or, noteworthy in our tradition. But just, before we move on to that, I want to just wrap up this thing about the calendar. So when it comes to the Islamic calendar, when it comes to, let's say puberty in Islam, when it comes to paying zakah, when it comes to the period where a woman has to wait before she can get remarried after a divorce, all of these things fall in line with the Islamic calendar, the lunar calendar, not the Gregorian calendar. Okay, and our calendar, our Islamic calendar, begins the year where the Prophet ﷺ migrated from Mecca to Medina. So we know that after he was sent as a prophet at the age of 40, he spent approximately 13 years in Mecca, calling people to Islam, and then eventually, for certain circumstances, had to leave Mecca and migrate to Medina. So when he made that migration, that is known as the year of the migration. And to make a long story short, that year was taken as as year zero or year one of the Islamic calendar. And so the migration of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, from Mecca to Medina marks the beginning of our Islamic calendar. So our current Islamic calendar right now is 1448. So 1448 years ago was when the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, migrated from Mecca to Medina, and we are going to be entering into the year 1441. So we will be entering into 1442 coming up this coming year, inshallah. So that pretty much in a pretty large nutshell is where we are in terms of the Islamic calendar. Now, the 12 months of the Islamic calendar, some of the things that the pre-Islamic Arabs were doing was also adopted by Islam. Now, interestingly, for maybe perhaps some of you that don't know, Islam didn't come to change the Arab culture at that time entirely. Islam didn't come and change every single cultural practice that they had. It definitely changed the practices that were involved with idolatry, that went against the teachings of Abraham. But it also affirmed some of the practices and customs that they were used to doing. And one of the practices and customs that the pre-Islamic Arabs used to do prior to the advent of Islam, and then Islam came and also continued that type of practice, is the understanding and this concept and this notion of having months of the year that are called the prohibited months, Ashhur al-Hurum, the prohibited months. Meaning what? Meaning that there are 4 months of the year, and I'll tell you what those months are in a second. There are 4 months in the Islamic calendar out of the 12 that are known as the prohibited months. Okay, and these months were established during the pre-Islamic era, but kept and preserved after the advent of Islam. Okay, these prohibited months, we know, good deeds are multiplied in these prohibited months, and sins are also multiplied in these prohibited months. Some scholars have said that, you know, if a person were to commit a crime during these particular months, that the punishment would be more severe. War is prohibited during these prohibited months. So, you know, the spilling of blood is prohibited during these prohibited months. So these months, even during the pre-Islamic era, tribes would, you know, often change, or tribes would often stop war if, you know, the war lasted to the, you know, several months and it entered into one of these prohibited months. They would stop war. They would wait for the month to be over, and then they would continue. The 4 prohibited months that we have in the Islamic calendar, we're actually in one of them right now, is the 11th, 12th, and 1st month of the year. Okay, so the 11th month, the one right after, the one right after, a couple after Ramadan, Dhul Qa'ada, okay, that's month number 11, followed by Dhul Hijjah, month number 12, the current Islamic calendar month that we're in, followed by the next month, month number 1, which is the month of Muharram, okay, and then there's a bit of a gap, and month number 7, the month of Rajab, is known as the 4th and final prohibited month. So you have 11, 12, and 1, and then number 7. And so, as I mentioned, these were months that were established in the pre-Islamic era and then preserved and maintained in Islam. Okay. One of the famous scholars of our time, of our tradition, Al-Hasan al-Basri, he was the generation after the Prophet ﷺ had passed away. So he's known as one of the successors, is the translation. In Arabic, we call them the Tabi'un. He said, Allah begins the year with a prohibited month and ends the year with a prohibited month. And there is no month greater in the sight of Allah after the month of Ramadan than the month of Muharram. He said they used to call it Shahrullahi al-Asam. He said that they used to call this month, the month of Allah, the deaf month. The deaf month? What does it mean to be the deaf month? The reason that the Arabs would call the month of Muharram the deaf month is because the month was always calm and quiet, because they wouldn't be able to hear a single sound of battle or a banging of swords during that month. So because it was so quiet, they called that month the deaf month. So to talk now, to kind of transition specifically more into the month of Muharram, the first month of the Islamic calendar, why is it so important? There's a narration in Sahih Muslim, the collection of prophetic sayings and traditions by one of our scholars, Imam Muslim, who narrates that the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said that the best fasting after the month of Ramadan is the month you call Muharram. Okay, so the Prophet ﷺ told us that the best month of fasting after the month of Ramadan is fasting in the month of Muharram. Okay, it could be that this is the best month to fast in its entirety, or it's better than fasting the days of Arafah, which we just passed a couple weeks ago, or the 6 days of Shawwal, those 6 days in the month immediately after the month of Ramadan. So there's difference of opinion. What does it mean that Muharram is the best month to fast in? So for those of you that are unaware, Muharram begins in, I think, about a week and a half or so. So we are towards the end of Dhul Hijjah, and this Islamic New Year will begin in about a week and a half or so. Okay, a man came to the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, and asked him, "Tell me about a month to fast after the month of Ramadan." The Prophet told him, "If you are to fast a day after the month of Ramadan, then fast the month of Muharram, because it is the month of Allah. In it, there is a day in which Allah forgave a group of people and forgives others." This is a narration. This particular tradition is narrated by Imam Tirmidhi. Okay, so why is it called the month of Allah? And why are certain things called, are attributed to Allah? We have, the Prophet of Allah, the Messenger of Allah. We have the house of Allah, right? The Kaaba, that black cube in Mecca. We also have the book of Allah, right? The Quran. And now we have the month of Allah. So what does it mean to have, something attributed to Allah? Allah doesn't have a house. Allah doesn't have a book. Allah doesn't have a messenger per se. No one's coming to him and giving him a message, right? So what does it mean when we attribute these types of qualities or things to Allah? So the scholars have said that whenever we attribute something to Allah, his book, his house, his messenger, his month, etc., it's to show how honored and special that thing is. So when we say the book of Allah, it is honoring that book and elevating its status. Same thing with the house of Allah, the month of Allah, the messenger of Allah, etc. Okay, and if fasting, okay, is the best thing to do in this month of Muharram, the month that the Prophet ﷺ said is the month of Allah, therefore that fasting of this month belongs to Allah, right? So if the month belongs to Allah and fasting in that month is the best thing that we can do, then that fasting also belongs to Allah as well. And we know that the Prophet ﷺ told us that for every deed, we have been given some type of reward. The Prophet ﷺ said, if a person intends to do a good deed but doesn't do it, he will get one reward. And if a person intends to do a good deed and then follows through and actually performs that good deed, they will get perhaps 10 good deeds. They will get perhaps 70 good deeds. They would get perhaps 700 good deeds. إِلَى أَضْعَافٍ كَثِيرًا, even perhaps more than 700. So I know oftentimes we think, oh, for every good deed you get 10. Well, that's actually the bare minimum, right? When in actuality, we could be very well getting 70 or 700 or even more than that. But then the Prophet ﷺ said, when it comes to fasting, Allah has not given a specific reward for fasting. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, Allah the Most Great said, that fasting is for me, and I will reward for it whatever reward that I want to give it. Right? So you can imagine then that the reward of Allah for fasting is something that, is unknown to us, simply because it is something that belongs to Allah alone. Okay. Ibn Abbas, so one of the companions now of the Prophet, one of his the younger companions, he said, Allah has increased the sanctity of these months, meaning those prohibited months, and has increased the severity of sins and the greatness of rewards during these months, which is one of the months that we're in right now, right? Dhul Hijjah. And the best of the days of Muharram are the first 10 days. Okay, so out of the 29 or 30 days of the month of Muharram, specifically the first 10 are given an added virtue. Okay, and scholars have even recommended to fast the end of this month, the month of Dhul Hijjah, and the beginning of the next month, Muharram, so that they may end and start the year in the obedience of Allah. So it is hoped that the entire year would be written down as an act of worship and would be looked at as a person whose actions are purely obedience. right? I ended the year fasting. I started the year fasting. So out of almost, the mercy of Allah to kind of look at the year and say, oh, this person pretty much, has spent the entire year fasting. Okay. In another narration, the Prophet ﷺ said that Allah said, O children of Adam, remember me at the beginning of the day for a time, and at the end of the day for a time. I will forgive you what is between the two, except for major sins. Okay? So again, this is something that also can be highlighted and exaggerated in the month of Muharram. So why, again, another great virtue of fasting, another important reason to that Allah shows us why fasting is something special, is that we know that there are 8 doors to enter into paradise, that the gates of Jannah, the gates of paradise, are 8, and each one of these gates has a name. And for all intents and purposes, the 7 of those gates, the names of those gates, we don't really know. But one of these particular gates, the name of this particular gate has been narrated to us. And that gate is called Bab al-Rayyan. Bab al-Rayyan. What the gate of al-Rayyan. What does Rayyan mean? Rayyan comes from a word in Arabic, which is rawa, which means to drink. Okay. And whenever we have words, so Arabic language, the Arabic language has something called morphology, where we kind of play with the letters of a word to either make it, the doer of the action, or the direct object. I don't want to turn this into a grammar session, but just know that the way that a word is formulated, the root letters of that word will mean different things, right? So I'll give you a very brief example. The word in Arabic to write, right? To write would be kataba, with kaf, kataba, okay, kataba. The person who writes is a katib. The desk is called the maktab. The thing that you've written is maktub. The book is called kitab. So all of these kind of different words all kind of are generated from that one root, kataba. So in this particular sense, the word rayyan is kind of built in a way to communicate exaggeration. Okay, so a person who is rayyan is a person who has essentially drunk so much that they are completely filled with a drink. Like there's no more room to put any type of drink. They can't drink another drop of water or another drop of juice or milk or anything, because they're so filled with liquid that they're just completely satiated with the drink. And so this gate of Rayyan is a gate that is specific for people who used to fast in this life, meaning that the people who were constantly fasting in this life have special VIP access to enter through that gate. No one will be able to enter through that gate except people who were extremely dedicated to this particular act of worship of fasting. And so if you think about it, what is the correlation between the name of the gate and the act of worship that people had to do to get into that gate? Well, we said it was fasting, and we said that Rayyan is a person who's completely satiated with liquid. So if you think about it, when we fast, right, we fast Ramadan or we fast any other day, when people ask you, especially at work, right, so you can't eat anything, you can't have anything to eat, you can't drink, not even water, right? It's usually that's kind of like the most unbelievable aspect of it, is that you can't even have water. And it's funny because most people, I'm not like that, but most people, if you ask them, like, hey, what's the most difficult thing about fasting for you? Is it the food or is it the drinking? Right? For me, it's the food. But for most people, they would say, no, the food, I don't have a problem with the food. It's the thirst that drives me crazy. It's the thirst that's really, really tough on me. And so as a result, um, because people suffer with the thirst more than anything. The gate in which they get to go through is a gate that is the exact opposite of that thirst, right? So they spent most of their life thirsty, fasting for the sake of Allah. Now they enter through a gate, which means they are completely satiated with liquid, entering into a place where they will never feel thirst ever again. So look at kind of the correlation between, the act of worship that we did and the honor and the distinction that we get by entering through that gate. And so we know, in this kind of the spirit of Islam and the spirit of the Islamic law, is whoever gives up their eating and their drinking and their desires for the sake of Allah, that Allah will replace those things with something better for them. And most of us have some type of experience like that, right? Where we've given up something for the sake of Allah, perhaps a bad relationship, perhaps some type of addiction, perhaps we've given up on a job, and we've given up on certain things for the sake of Allah. And when we walk away from those things, we often feel, I have no idea where I'm going to find a better person, or I don't know how I'm going to last, not, drinking or smoking, or I don't know where I'm going to find another job or whatever. And then, out of nowhere, through a door that we didn't even know that was existed, Allah provides us something that was better than the thing that we left. And this is, a practice of Allah to always replace what we have with something better. Okay. And let's see here. So what I wanted to then focus on is one last thing about fasting before we get into specifically the 10th of Muharram, is remember that truly sincere people will attempt to conceal the fact that they're fasting at all costs. Okay, meaning what? Meaning that fasting is unlike any other act of worship, in the sense that all of the other acts of worship, you are actually physically doing something, right? With prayer, you are physically making movements and people can see you. When you pay zakah, you're physically doing something and people can perhaps see you paying zakah. When you perform hajj, millions of people can see you performing hajj. But when it comes to fasting, you live a normal life. But the only thing that people don't see is no one's going to notice if you don't eat and drink, right? And so concealing this fact from other people is a sign that a person is, trying to be sincere. And so there's an interesting story about a man who would take 2 loaves of bread with him when he left his house in the morning, and then gave them away in charity on his way to work. That way, his family thought that he ate them at the market, and the people of the market would think that he ate at home, when in actuality, he didn't eat, at all. And so doing our best to conceal, our acts of worship in general, but specifically fasting, are a sign of a person's sincerity. All right, so moving forward, we talked about the Islamic months, we talked about the forbidden months, we talked about how the month of Muharram is the first Islamic month of the calendar. We talked about how fasting outside of Ramadan, the best month to fast is the fasting of the month of Muharram. Specifically, however, the 10th day of Muharram, gets special attention. Ibn Abbas, again, that famous companion who I mentioned a little bit ago, he said, I have never seen the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, adamantly seek the virtue of any day or month other than Ramadan than I have in Muharram and the day of Ashura. Ashura comes from Ashara, which means 10, which refers to the 10th day of the month. So the companion is saying, I have never seen him so adamantly seeking the virtue of any day or any month outside of Ramadan more than I have seen him seeking the virtue specifically of the month of Muharram and then more specifically the day of Ashura. Abu Huraira, another famous companion, he said that the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said that the prophets before you used to fast on the day of Ashura, so fast on that day as well. The wife of the Prophet ﷺ, Aisha, said that Quraysh, the tribe of Quraysh, the tribe where the Prophet ﷺ was from, she said that even Quraysh used to fast the month of Ashura prior to Islam, and the Prophet himself would fast it as well. And when he arrived in Medina, he fasted this day and he commanded others to fast that day as well. And when Ramadan became obligatory, because Ramadan didn't start off as an obligation, right? It started off as a recommendation, believe it or not. And then the next year, it became an obligation. So when the month of Ramadan became an obligation, then he told people, you don't have to fast it anymore as an obligation. Meaning what? Meaning that very early, during the early years of Islam, fasting Ashura was actually an obligation. It was an obligation just like fasting the month of Ramadan. But when the month of Ramadan became an obligation, the obligation to fast Ashura was removed. And so Ashura, but just to kind of give you an idea of how important the day of Ashura actually is. Ibn Abbas, again, that famous companion, he said that the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, found the Jews of Medina fasting the day of Ashura. And he asked the Jewish people of Medina, why do you fast on this 10th day of Muharram? Like, why, what's so special? Why do you guys? He's like, I know why we fast it, right? It is because that's something that we did. But why do you Jewish people fast this particular day? The Jewish people of Medina said that this is the day that Allah saved Moses and his people, and the day that he drowned Pharaoh and his people. And we fast this day, and Moses used to fast this day out of thanks and gratitude to Allah for saving him and his people. And so they fasted. The Jewish people, they're saying that we fasted in commemoration of Moses fasting it. And then the Prophet ﷺ said that Moses is just as much of a prophet to us as he is to you, and we're going to fast that day as well. Okay. Another companion by the name of Muawiyah said that this is the day of Ashura. Allah did not obligate its fasting, but I am fasting. And whoever wants to fast, then let him fast. And whoever wants to, let them not fast. So it's clearly not an obligation, right, to fast this day of Ashura, but it is definitely highly, highly recommended. Okay. So the fasting of Ashura in the Islamic context actually went through 4 different stages, from on again, off again, and I'll explain what those stages are very quickly, and then I'll get into the recommendation of it. So the first stage in Islam, with regards to the fasting of Ashura, the Prophet would fast the day in Mecca, right? But he wouldn't command the Muslims to do so. Okay, he would fast it, he would, observe it individually, but he didn't command the companions to fast that day. The second stage is that the Prophet commanded the people to fast on that day. Okay, that it was an obligation for them to fast on that day. It was, it was a wajib. It was an obligation for them to fast on that day. So it went from a personal observation, then to an obligation, and then that third stage is that once Ramadan, the 9th month, became obligatory to fast, the obligation to fast the day of Ashura was removed. And then the fourth and final stage, towards the end of his life, the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, told us to add a day after or a day before, okay, to distinguish our fasting from the fasting of the Jewish people. Why is that? Generally speaking, we are commanded to differentiate our worship from the worship of other religions. And that's why we are commanded not to pray when the sun is rising, and not to pray when it's, at high noon, and not to pray when the sun is setting. So we don't, so we don't what's the word, imitate other religions. Also, the Jewish people were known to, fast on the 10th of Muharram, Ashura. So to distinguish our fasting from their fasting, the Prophet said to either fast the 9th and the 10th, or to fast the 10th and the 11th, but to kind of make it different. Also, we know that the Prophet ﷺ told us, hey, you know what? The Jews and the Christians, yes, they have a beard, but they also let their mustaches grow very long. So he said, to differentiate ourselves from them, we will trim the mustache or even shave the mustache and keep the beard the same. So the kind of moral of the story, and the entire kind of point of today's lecture, was that we do have an Islamic calendar based off of the lunar calendar, not the solar calendar. We said that out of the 12 months of the Islamic calendar, 4 of them are known as the prohibited months, where good deeds are multiplied and sins are multiplied and war is forbidden. And that we are the last 2 months of the year, followed by 11 and 12, followed by the first month of the year, number 1, followed by month number 7, are known as the prohibited months. We know that that the Prophet ﷺ would love to fast in the month of Muharram more than any other month outside of Ramadan. And we know that specifically the first 10 days of Muharram have special virtues. And we know specifically that the 10th of Muharram has a special virtue, because that was the day in which Moses was saved from Pharaoh. And as I mentioned, because it used to be an obligation and now it wasn't. So to please, take advantage of the month of Muharram coming up. Start the year off, with acts of obedience towards Allah. Be sure to fast the day of Ashura and to add a day before it or a day after it. So fast, the 9th and the 10th, or the 10th and the 11th. 2 weeks, I think in 2 weeks or so is when, let me actually pull up the exact date for you. 1 second. So Muharram begins next Thursday. Okay, so in about 10 days or so is when Muharram begins. And then the 10th of Muharram is August 29th. Okay, so if you wanted to fast the 9th and the 10th, you could fast the 28th of August and the 29th of August. And those can be the 2 days that you fast, or, the 29th and 30th. But with that, inshallah, I know a little bit of a shorter session today. But I just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware that we are ending the Islamic year. We will be beginning a new year, the month of Muharram, some of the virtues of the month of Muharram, and specifically the 10th day of Dhul Hijjah. So with that, I'll wrap up, inshallah. And if anybody has any comments or questions, I'd love to hear it. Jazakumullah khairah. All right, so I think we have one in the comments. It says, you mentioned when God is attached to certain things, it brings importance to those things. Is that true as well when he swears by something in the Quran? Moon, sun, olive, fig, etc. Due to this importance, do we start eating olive, figs, reflecting on the moon, etc.? Oh, very good. So no doubt that Allah does not swear by anything in the Quran, washamsi, by the sun, wal qamari, wattini, wazaytuni. He swears by, the fig and the olive and time, wal asr. And no doubt that Allah does not swear by anything except that that thing is important for some reason, right? I know that we are not allowed to swear by anything other than Allah. So when we swear, we're not allowed to say on my mother's life, or on my grandmother's soul, or on my life, or I swear on my children's life, or whatever. We are actually not allowed to swear by anything other than Allah. Allah, however, is allowed, can swear by any aspect of his creation. And so an interesting story one of our scholars of our tradition alive today, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, um, he said that when he was studying in Mauritania, um, his his teacher, I think, had asked him for a pen, and he threw the pen to the teacher, and the teacher said, you shouldn't throw things and disrespect things that Allah has sworn by, right? Because Allah has sworn وَالْقَلَمِ وَمَا يَسْطُرُونَ, by the pen and what it writes. So he said, don't disrespect things that Allah has Himself has honored and respected. And so, no doubt that there are specific certain things that no doubt Allah mentioned these things because they're important. Now, to go out of our way to enjoy them and to eat them, if a person wanted to like imitate the Prophet ﷺ, and if the Prophet ﷺ used to love to eat squash, for example, and I'm not a big fan of squash, but because I want to imitate the Prophet ﷺ, and be as close to him as possible, then I'm going to start learning to eat squash. Then that's something that's praiseworthy. Ibn Abbas, that same companion that I mentioned, he said that I used to hate squash, but then I found out that the Prophet ﷺ used to love it. So I ate it so much that I then became in love with it, just so he can kind of connect with the Prophet ﷺ in that way as well. So yeah, definitely hold those things in high regard. But Allah knows best. Yeah. All right. In terms of fasting, I am the only Muslim in my family, and we usually eat together as a family. My family does not know I am Muslim. What suggestions can you give me in hiding my fast? Let's see. I would perhaps maybe tell them that you have, plans around iftar time, so you can make sure that you eat, or around whenever they eat dinner, to make to tell them that you have plans. But here's the thing: is that there's a balance between doing this act of worship of fasting, and then also being honorable to your family and maintaining family ties, and making sure that they don't hate you or dislike you for whatever reason, or to cause any type of enmity in the family. So, you could even argue that not fasting and having, lunch or dinner with your family as a family could be a greater act of worship than fasting on that particular day, because of the, exaggerated recommendation that we have to be good to our family and maintain family ties. So Ramadan is a different story because that's an obligation, right? And definitely, you would have to fast that, but we're quite a ways from that still. But for these one-off days, if you know in advance, hey, I want to fast on this particular day, maybe try to make plans around it, but obviously not at the not if it's going to cause any type of problems with your family. So you would know your situation best, but don't force it if it's going to cause any type of like I said, enmity amongst your family. Allah knows best. Do the Jews still fast this day? Would it be the same date as ours in the Muharram every year? So one thing about the Jews in Medina is that the Jews of Medina were not mainstream Jews. They are not, what I mean by mainstream. So do you ever stop to ask yourself, like, what were a group of Jewish people doing in Medina? Like, no doubt they existed, right? Even historians, like academics and stuff, they'll admit that the Jews existed in Medina, right? That's a historical fact. But how did they end up there, right? Why would a bunch of Jews just randomly wind up in Medina? And, there's no real answer to that question, but there are some theories. And one of the theories is, and I believe that this is to be the strongest theory, and it's actually my opinion as well, is that during this, a couple centuries before the coming of the Prophet ﷺ, the Jews in Constantinople and in the Roman Empire were under a lot of persecution, and the Jews that were allowed to live in the Roman Empire and things like that were of a particular mainstream type of Jewish theology, and as you can imagine, like in Islam and in Christianity, also in Judaism, you had random sects coming about. And these random sects that didn't believe, and didn't hold these mainstream views were actually, persecuted by other Jews and were chased out of their lands where the majority of Jewish people lived. And so the theory goes that the Jews in Medina are one of these sects that were not mainstream. And this is further supported by the fact that the Jews of Medina believed, and the Quran quotes that the Jews of Medina believed that God had a son named Uzair. But this belief that God has a son, Uzair, is not a mainstream Jewish belief. If you've ever read any of the Jewish texts, you will know that Jews are very, very, very monotheistic, very staunch monotheists, similar to us. And when I was reading some of their texts, you really couldn't tell the difference between if it was a Jewish person writing it or a Muslim writing it, just because of how spot on their monotheism is relative, right? Now, obviously, there's differences, but relative to ours. So having said that, it's not to my knowledge. You'd have to ask a mainstream Jew because the Jewish population of Medina at that time is not or was not representative of mainstream Jewish theology and practice at that time and even today. So to answer the question, I do not know. All of that just to say I do not know. But I wanted to tell you why I don't know. So you would have to ask a Jewish person for that.
Allah bless you, Sheikh Jameel. Leave us on a cliffhanger there.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. And I want to thank all the audience for tuning in. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you all. Thank you so much for the questions. Sheikh Jameel, thank you so much for being patient with us. Great lecture, great discussion. Thank you so much for the importance of this, as it is just a little over a week away. So we thank you for reminding us, as the reminder is always beneficial, right, for the believers. Thank you so much. Just a few announcements before we call it a day. Number one is I'm very thankful for this online venue, even though the mosque technically is closed. We can still have a way to communicate. So I encourage you all, please do your best to stay tuned with us here at on our YouTube channel, IIOC Outreach. Just go ahead and subscribe so that you get the updates as much as you can. And both of our classes are still going. Our Friday Coffee with the Shaykh every Friday from 6 to 7 p.m., which is an open QA session. And then every Sunday, this class, Islam 101, every week we tend to have a different speaker with a different topic revolving around some of the basics of Islam. So please make sure to join us there. Very quickly, I wanted to share some very good news that happened today. It was amazing. Given the COVID-19 situation, some of the news that we get, or much of it's kind of disheartening, or so with stats and numbers, etc. But it's always good to hear some good news, and that is a little bit before this class started, we had two people that had embraced Islam months ago, Brother Luis and his wife Leslie, and they both originally are from Mexico. And Brother Luis actually found out about Islam in Mexico at a mosque in Mexico, a very small mosque. And the individual there referred him to IIOC.
Wow.
Look how this works. It's interesting. So he goes to Mexico. He hears about Islam there, right? He comes to IIOC, and then he becomes Muslim and so forth. Or I'm not sure if he took Shahada there, and then he was referred to our masjid. However, the interesting thing about this was that he lived literally a few miles from the IIOC mosque in Buena Park. Right? He heard about Islam, learned it in Mexico, came here, and all this time he was very close to the mosque. The story doesn't end there. He then goes back to Mexico a few months ago, and he talks to his family about Islam, just kind of informs them, educates them in a very nice way. if I'm not mistaken, 6 of his family members, embraced Islam, including his mother.
MashaAllah.
Day for the
MashaAllah.
first time his mother came to the mosque, or in the vicinity of the mosque, and she was so overwhelmed, and she was so just looking at the mosque and being here. So just wanted to share that good news that given the COVID-19 situation, the message of Islam doesn't stop, right? It is still
Mm.
out there, and that's why I remind myself and everybody here, do your best in whatever capacity you can with the mandates out there to share Islam as much
No.
as one can. So may Allah bless you all. Also, our new Muslim graduation is going to be coming up. There's some good news, so stay tuned for the details. As you know, we have a mentorship program. Once people complete that, they learn how to pray. We really want to celebrate that because you've learned how to pray and know who God is and memorize Surah Fatiha amongst other chapters or surahs of the Quran. So we want to celebrate this. So stay tuned. It'll be coming up in about probably a month and a half or so. Uh, and um, and last and certainly not least, keep in mind the mosque is open outdoors for the Friday sermon, the Jum'ah. As you know, even though the mosque is closed, if we can make some type of arrangement outside, which we did, you can come. So for Friday sermon, it is open outdoors in the back there. We have some tents there. We have 3 sermons. First one's at 12:40, second one is at 1:30, and the third one is at 2:15. It's first come first base. So if you can get here, just make sure your face covering, prayer rug, and of course, do your best to keep social distancing. May Allah keep you all smiling. May Allah keep you all happy and peace and safe during this time. Sheikh Jameel, as always, thank you so much. I consider you as a mentor, as a teacher, and as like a big brother to me. And I certainly learned a lot being around you. So I thank you for joining us. And may Allah bless you and your family. Thank you so
I
much.
mean, may Allah bless you as well and protect us and allow us to uh, contribute towards, his path, because wallahi, he does not require any one of us.
Mm.
Had he willed, he could very easily guide everybody to Islam, but it is an opportunity for us to kind of ride the wave of that goodness. So just ask Allah to allow us to keep us sincere and to, give us more opportunities to serve in that capacity. Inshallah.
Thank you so much. I mean, all right, everyone. May Allah bless you all. Peace be upon you all. Assalamu alaikum. We will see you back on Friday. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much.
Salam.